Good evening. I'm David Clooney, Executive Director of the Black Economic Alliance. On behalf of our co-chairs, Tony Coles and Charles Phillips, and the whole board of the Black Economic Alliance, it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening. The Black Economic Alliance has had a speaker series going since about March, talking about work, wages, and wealth, but tonight is different. Tonight we have the sponsors of a groundbreaking, bold proposal called the Jobs and Neighborhood Investment Act that I heard Senator Mark Warner say on MSNBC yesterday, if passed, and hopefully when passed, will be the largest investment in communities of color in American history. The bill that you'll hear much more about tonight invests or seeks to invest $17.5 billion in communities of color by getting money to the community development financial institutions and minority depository institutions that really serve as the backbone for financing in communities of color that everybody on this call knows, but many people have learned in recent months. Many communities of color, both people and businesses, are really locked out of the traditional banking system and even government programs. So these organizations serve a vital function getting access to capital to people of color, particularly communities of color, and particularly Black people. So kudos to Senator Warner and the other sponsors for including the Black Economic Alliance in the drafting of this bill and really building a broad coalition of support and input as you put this bill out and hopefully as we push it forward in the Senate, in the House, and then on to the White House for signature. One of the other things, so 2020 has taught us many things, some we wanted to learn, some we should have learned. But one of the things it continues to teach us is that everybody has a role to play in combating and dismantling systemic injustice and systemic racism. The Black Economic Alliance is only a few years old, and relative to organizations that have been looking out for the interest of Black people for over 100 years, like the NAACP and the National Urban League, we really work in conjunction and stand on the shoulders of these organizations. So it's my pleasure that we have this evening with us the chief executives of both the National Urban League and the NAACP. So I would very quickly turn it over to first Mark Morial, if he's on, to give us some very brief statements of support for this bill. And I see Derek Johnson on, so maybe we'll start with you, Derek, from the NAACP, and then we'll go over to Mark. So Derek, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, David. And I looked up and Mark is on MSNBC, so I'm wondering if BEA is more important or MSNBC.
I guess he got a better offer.
Got a better office. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to join you. Good to see Senator Harris and Leader Schumer on the line. I first want to say the inclusion of BEA in this discussion has elevated our opportunity to really analyze policy and operate from a space of understanding what's in the best interest in growing a Black business class. I think that's critical and important. To talk about the issues of structural racism and not talk about the growth of a Black business class is not having an honest discussion. And so in this effort and all of the efforts I've seen both Chuck and Tony and now David take on has been integral in our evolution as a community to really tackle issues of not only getting jobs, but actually growing a strong Black business class. So thank you all for pulling this together. And I'm gonna sit back and listen to the smart people so y'all can help me understand about this business stuff.
Well, thank you, Derek. And now that we see Mark is on TV, we will give him a minute to join, but I will just name, you all should have seen on the invite, but we have with us Leader Schumer, Senator Mark Warner, Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Cory Booker, and we will have Congressman
David, I'm sorry, I didn't acknowledge Cory got a haircut and I didn't see him at first, so I apologize for not acknowledging.
He's got the right haircut.
The right haircut, I'm sorry.
Man of great taste.
It's my COVID cut.
Yeah.
So I will hand the program over to BEA co-chair Charles Phillips. You'll hear from Charles, and you'll also hear from BEA member David Grain, CEO and founder of Grain Management, who was helpful in crafting this legislation as well. And then Tony Coles, the other co-chair of the Black Economic Alliance, will close us out. So Charles, over to you.
Thanks, David. And on behalf of Tony and I, welcome everyone and thanks for doing this. So this is important legislation. We've been working on this closely with Senator Warner and Senator Schumer, and it's time late. So first of all, thank you for leading it. And thank you everyone for having an interest in this. So let me give you a little bit backdrop before we jump into it and have everybody give opening statements. So there are about 1,100 CDFIs, and there's one in every state. they only have about 120 billion of capital right now. So compare that to the banking system with 19 trillion. So this is a small fraction. Secondly, there are a lot of programs out to help big banks and corporates who need lending. So I'm on the board of the New York Fed. We had 9 different programs. 350 billion of that capital went unused. It's plenty of capital. So this is a small fraction relative to what we had already thought we were going to spend as well. The third thing I'd like to point out is that I do think this could be a flywheel effect. If these banks get and CDFIs get some capital, large corporates will be willing to put deposits in it. So they don't want to be 50% of a bank's deposits, but as they get stronger and bigger, so you just saw what Netflix announced last week, they're putting 100 million in CDFIs, but they are an outlier. They will take the risk and be a little more aggressive. But he says more people want to do that, but they're worried about the size of these banks. So this tier 1 equity helps that as well. So I think this could be something that we look back on that really changes the game in terms of getting more capital to Black businesses, obviously having more Black people stay employed. And so I just want to thank everybody who's worked on this. So with that, what we had in mind was just going around the horn and let everybody make an opening statement for about a minute or two on why you're doing this, what's the outcome expected, and maybe later we'll get into how you're going to get this passed as well. So let's start with you, Senator Warner. As I see you.
He's on mute.
Oh, that's Senator Schumer is him. Oh, okay.
Hey, Mark.
That is rare that I'm muted, but let me thank Charles and Tony, the whole BEA Alliance. Let me thank my dear friend David Grain, who I've spent literally months talking with on trying to shape this legislation, and obviously my colleagues Chuck and Kamala and Cory, and I know we're going to be joined by Greg Meeks from the House as well. My background was all in venture capital, and I've seen literally for years.
You want me to go check it?
Literally for years,
like?
the failure to have fair access to capital for Black Americans, Brown Americans, and all of those. The economic disparity wasn't created by COVID, but COVID has accelerated that exponentially. We're seeing now of the 2.7 million basic Black businesses in America, already 440,000 of them have had to shut down at a rate almost 2.5 to 1 over white-owned businesses. And we saw in our efforts to date, the PPP program, well-intentioned, but if you were a Black-owned business, Latinx-owned business, a woman-owned business, and you didn't have traditional banking relationships, as Charles mentioned, your chance of getting that capital was slim to none. So what we've been working on for a number of months is how can we not only help COVID-wise, but on a structural basis to invest tier 1 capital into minority depository institutions, Black and Brown-owned banks, CDFIs, and it comes in three programs, very briefly. $2.9 billion of direct grants, of which $400 million will be technology upgrades for back office operations, and folks like Robert Smith have been big advocates of that. $7 billion literally in tier 1 capital that will help these institutions exponentially at an 8 to 9 to 10 to 1 ratio in terms of lending directly into these institutions. And then finally giving these institutions the same access as they create new loans to package those loans and sell them off at the larger institutions, $8 billion in that program. And I want to thank all of my Senate colleagues for their great work on this. I do think this can be a short-term and long-term economic game changer, and look forward to the conversation and talking also about how we make sure this doesn't just become a bill, but becomes law. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I see Mark Morrell has joined us. Mark, you want to make a brief statement of support?
Hi.
Hey.
Great. Am I on?
Yeah, you are on live.
Hey, thanks, Chuck, and thanks, Senator Warner, for your efforts. Very quickly, this is a long overdue effort.
Hey, Mark, this is David. Start your video. There you go.
There you go. Yeah, good. First of all, let me just thank Chuck Phillips and David Clooney of the Black Economic Alliance, all my colleagues in the civil rights community, NAACP, National Action Network, and others, and also Senator Warner and other members of Congress, Congressman Greg Meeks, for their work on this bill. It is long overdue for there to be a comprehensive effort to invest in African-American financial institutions, invest in, if you will, African-American communities, and to really address the systemic economic disparities that have been laid bare and made even worse by the COVID pandemic. We know the wealth gap is 10 to 1. We know African-American financial institutions at 22 are not what they were 20 years ago. We know that the community of CDFIs, of which the National Urban League is one, have toiled in the vineyard for many years to bring capital to minority businesses. So this bill, I think, is a very powerful step in the right direction towards doing this. So we're proud to be a part of this, and we're proud to be a part of the coalition that has done this. Just a word about the National Urban League. We run 12 entrepreneurship centers in the United States that serve 14,000 small businesses a year. We have a CDFI called the Urban Empowerment Fund. We just completed a round of lending in South Florida and in Cleveland, and we've raised another fund that we're going to soon invest in communities across the nation. We also host and manage workforce programs, housing counseling programs that serve literally millions of Americans each year. So this is consistent with what we stand for, consistent with the work we do, and we look forward to the fight ahead to make sure this bill becomes law. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Leader Schumer looks like he's on the phone. You're on mute, Leader. Did we get him? Did you...
He's working it out.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. So thank you. And let me thank all of you for being on the phone. Let me thank BEA and Charles and Tony and everybody else who helped put this together. Mark Warner's been a great leader on this issue, and he's been passionate about it for months. I thank him, as well as my colleagues, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, who have been leading our caucus in so many ways during these difficult times, and my dear fellow New Yorker, Greg Meeks, who's taken the lead in the House. Look, it's our passion as Senate Democrats to deal with the systematic racism that we've seen throughout America. And obviously, we put together a very strong Justice in Policing Act led by Cory and Kamala. But justice in policing is just a part of the problem. The economic problems run deep and fundamental. And so we have to change things, and change things in a dramatic way. And so what our caucus put together was something called the Economic Justice Act. We took the $350 billion sitting in the Main Street lending program to go to big corporations that's just sitting there, and said it's not being used. It's just sitting there, and we are going to take that money and put it into communities of color. And we have 10 different programs as part of that, dealing with housing, dealing with infrastructure, dealing with creating set-asides for jobs for small minority-owned businesses, dealing with public health. It's a lot of money. It would be the biggest investment in minority communities since CRA over the decades, which I was so involved in at the beginning. A very fundamental part of that, one of the 10 parts of our proposal, but a vital part, is what you have all done here today, which is the Jobs and Neighborhood Investment Act. If we can get real capitalist institutions that are devoted to the minority community, and we can gain them the expertise, and we can gain them the capital, there's no telling what they can do. Robert Smith and I worked very hard with Mnuchin. I don't know if Robert's on the phone here or on the video, but we worked very hard to have a set aside of $10 billion for CDFIs, and we couldn't do it for MDIs because of Mnuchin's resistance. But that is money that will be well spent, but it's not permanent. It's dealing with the present problem, and it will prevent a lot of minority-owned small businesses from going out. What you're doing is permanent, and it'll continue to channel money into places that haven't gotten money before. And that's why it is so vital. So we are going to push very hard Our Economic Justice Act is the most major investment in inner city communities that is the federal government has ever made. And a lot of people on this phone, including my colleagues who are on the phone, as well as Mark Morial and Derek Johnson and so many others, Al Sharpton, and their groups have been vital in putting this forward and getting it forward. And this is the sort of capstone. The proposal you're talking about is a capstone because it will continually and permanently not depend on government, but provide a funnel of real capital to small businesses and provide that ladder up. My dad was a small businessman. He was an exterminator, had a junky little business. But at least it gave his ability to provide his family, he never went to college, a little bit of security. And hey, his son's a US Senator. My dad, by the way, is 97. He was an exterminator. And he says, gee, how bad could DDT have been? I'm 97. But in any case, this is vital. I'm excited about it. I am prepared to do everything I can do to see that our entire Economic Justice Act, like the Jobs and Neighborhood Investment Act, particularly, get in the COVID-4 bill. And we as a caucus will make it a fight to make that happen because this is just great. This is permanence. What we want to do, what our caucus is trying to do, is in many areas take the mirror. You know, I like to say Dr. King held a giant mirror on his shoulders, and with his eloquence, he forced America to look into it, and America didn't like what it saw and changed a bit. COVID is in a certain mirror. It's forced us to look at the inequities, whether it's healthcare or housing or jobs or capital formation in the minority community. And shame on us if we don't take that mirror that people are now looking into and transform it into some permanent solutions. And this is one of the best I've seen. So thank you for everyone who worked so hard on this.
Thank you. Senator Harris, I saw you join. Thank you. Want to make a statement?
First of all, I just want to thank everybody, all of the leaders who are on this call, from BA, of course, for all you do and have been doing as a voice about the need for economic empowerment and opportunity, our civil rights leaders, and of course my colleagues in the Senate. A lot has been said about this moment. This is a moment where our nation is facing a crisis that is a public health crisis that has become an economic crisis, and of course we are dealing with the crisis of 400 plus years of systemic racism all at the same time. And and we honor with pain but also with joy the life of John Lewis, who we have been commemorating over the course of the last couple of days, and remembering that he was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington, which we remember was the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. And so we know, and this is why we have this collection of leaders here today who are who you are, that there is a complete intersection and overlap between the fight for civil rights in America and the fight for economic justice and economic freedom. And so that's what this is about. And I commend Mark Warner and of course always our leader Schumer and my dear brother Cory Booker for all the work that is happening around this initiative that is very specific. It is about the issue of access to capital and how do we grow access to capital, understanding that that is the mechanism by which we actually achieve economic justice and equality. When Black families have 1/10 of the wealth of white families, when we have looked at the fact during the course of this epidemic that 99% of the small business owners and minority business owners and women business owners, at over 90% did not receive the benefit of the PPP, and in large part because they are unbanked, they don't have the relationships with the big bankers, and so they were not first in line and last in line, in fact, to get the benefit. They are owning and running businesses that represent not only intergenerational wealth, but they are also, as business leaders, community leaders, civic leaders, they employ locally. They feed the spirit, the culture, and the economy of their communities. So this initiative is about really uplifting and dealing with longstanding deficits and disparities around access to capital in America. Some of the stats you all know, we have 4,700 banks in the United States, 21 are Black owned. If you look at MDIs, you will know that MDIs originate 65% of the mortgages for low-income and minority homeowners. That they actually originate 4 times the number of non-MDI financial institutions. So the connection here is very real, and the beauty of this policy initiative is it is not only about acknowledgement of the need to allow greater access to Black-owned, minority-owned businesses, but also to grow the strength and the capacity of MDIs and these community banks, which are trusted in the community, which understand the community. And by growing them, we will do what is necessary to increase intergenerational wealth. There's so much about the movement right now that has also been about talking about how do you achieve safety. And I've been saying for a long time, you know, you want to build safe communities, invest in healthy communities. And the attributes of a healthy community include its small business owners having access to capital. It is a healthy community invests in its entrepreneurs. A healthy community invests in the talent and the aspirations of the people in its community to grow their skill and to grow their businesses. And for all of these reasons, that I'm very excited to be a part of this policy initiative and this component of a movement that started long before us, but always had as its vision that we would put emphasis and priority around economic justice and economic growth and intergenerational wealth for Black people in America.
Fantastic, thank you. Senator Booker, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be on. My colleagues have said it all. I'm just grateful to be a part of this conversation and just give a lot of love to our leaders that are on this, from our 2 brothers who lead the NAACP and the Urban League, and then of course our Chuck and my sister Kamala and Mark Warner, who's looking very like he lost a little weight recently. I guess you're working hard there, Mark, and just appreciate everybody and again, this organization. So I'm just looking forward to the continued conversation.
Great, thanks. So we'll move into some Q&A, and Tony Coles and David Grain, who worked on this a lot with me, will jump in as they see fit. But I think the main question on everyone's mind is, how do you get this passed through the Senate? And so we have a lot of important senators on the call. So maybe Leader Schumer, if they're still there. We can start with you and anybody else who wants to jump in, and we're concerned about the path, the political path, I guess.
Okay, well, as you know, the House already passed a very large, comprehensive, and very good COVID-4 bill that they call, or we all call, the HEROES Act, that has a whole lot of stuff in it that we need, extending pandemic unemployment insurance, making the PPP program work better, $100 billion to prevent people from being evicted from their homes and helping pay the rent, money for labor and OSHA standards, so many different good things. The Senate Republicans have done virtually nothing. They're tied in a knot. They got about 15 of them who are right-wing ideologues who don't want to spend any money on anything. And you know, the Republican mantra, which is let the private sector, doesn't work when you have the greatest health crisis in 100 years since 1919 and the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. So they're sort of tied in a knot. But now in the last few days, they're trying to come together with a minimalist proposal, which doesn't come close to meeting the needs. So what will happen is that Mnuchin, Speaker Pelosi, myself, Leader McConnell, and Leader McCarthy will sit down and we will begin negotiating what should be in the bill. And there's lots of give and take. There's no guarantee. They started out in COVID 2, 3, and 3.5 with such stingy, parsimonious bills that we all voted no. But then they came to the table, and they came to the table because Mnuchin and some of the others convinced President Trump, if you do nothing, we will not just have a great recession, we will have a Great Depression. So I believe they will, even with this stingy bill, come to the table, and then we'll negotiate. And we will try our best to get the Economic Justice Act and the Neighborhood Investment Act as put together, put as part of that bill in negotiations. They will ask for certain things. We'll see what they ask for. The good news here is that the money for these proposals is there, because the $400 billion that Treasury set aside for the Main Street lending facility, as you investment folks know, no one's using it. It's sitting there. So we say take half of that money, or even 2/3 of that money, and put it into minority communities. You know, there's a growing clamor in America that we should create justice, racial justice, but not just, you know, on law enforcement lines, where Cory and Kamala have done such a good job in putting together the Justice and Policing Act with the support of many people here from NAACP, Urban League, et cetera, on the phone, but economic justice. And this will be a major push of ours. Is there a guarantee we get it in? No. Who knows? Maybe we won't even get a bill if they're so stingy, and if Trump is even crazier than he is now and undercuts them, maybe we won't get a bill at all. But if they want to come to the table in good faith, this will be very high up on our list. And I think we have a very good chance of getting the Economic Justice Act is large. It's $250 billion. But I will tell you, the Jobs and Neighborhood Investment Act, part of it, the Economic Justice Act deals, as I said, with housing. It has Cory's favorite provisions on lead paint, getting it out of the inner city. It deals with infrastructure, inner city infrastructure. It deals with economic job training and justice. It deals with healthcare, creating more equal healthcare in the inner cities. But this provision, which is less costly than most of them, but really has permanent bang for the buck because it mainlines money into minority communities, is very, very important to Mark and Kamala and Cory, to me, and to our entire caucus. So what it'll have to be is a negotiation where you trade back and forth. It would help, since so many of you are in the investment community, to have Republicans who say this is a good idea. Mark Warner has been working some of the Republicans, and if we can get bipartisan support, so much the better. But it'll be a back and forth negotiation. It probably won't be something that's voted on this particular on the floor. But when the leaders come to agreement, I will, and I'm sure Nancy will, make it a very high priority to say this has got to be part of the deal.
Charles, let me add to what Leader Schumer has said, and why I feel so, at this moment at least, good about our prospects. As Chuck indicated, while this is a $17.9 billion proposal, as Chuck indicated, these funds have already been appropriated. This would simply be a reallocation of these dollars, and there's a variety of places we can look, number one. Number two, every one of these programs that we have promoted build upon existing programs that may not have been available for Black-owned banks or CDFIs before, but are in existence. There's the $2.9 billion that goes into the CDFI fund, the technology back upgrades. There's already a CDFI fund and a formula there. The idea of tier one capital going into these institutions is very similar to what happened after the 2008 crisis. And we're literally building on a program that was written into law in 2010. The $8 billion, which has a potential to be leveraged with the Fed, and we're still working through some of those issues, but has the ability then, and as Leader Schumer said, both the tier one capital and then the ability of these institutions to take their new loans and package them and sell them off similar to the way larger institutions do, gives them that additional firepower that makes this, I think somebody said, this a flywheel effect, that it's not a one-time investment. So the second major point is that it builds on all the existing programs. First major point being the fact that we're reallocating dollars. Third is, and I have great affection for Leader Schumer, but I actually think some of my Republican colleagues on this get the idea that access to capital is critical. When you look at the fact that Black businesses have had to been shut down at a rate almost 2.5 to 1 over white businesses during this COVID, when you see the lack of PPP funds going, the Black-owned businesses, Latino businesses, other, small businesses in frankly, rural and other areas. There is clearly a crying need. And I think there will be, and I've had a number of conversations with Secretary Mnuchin, I think there's an appetite here. And then finally, I think that the people who are on this call, people like President Johnson and President Mark Morial and a host of the civil rights organizations, but I would argue in many ways, I would hope you as BEA, a relatively new organization, but an organization with the next generation of Black leadership in this country, can make this the signature item that will be the first of many policy accomplishments that you will enact. I mean, I remember the conversation that we all had together in David's backyard a year ago, David Green's backyard, where ideas like this were outlined. This is the chance for us to kind of all put our shoulder to the wheel. And the remarkable thing is, this will happen or not in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And I know our good friend Greg Meeks, who's really he's been working on these issues, I know, with Kamala and for so long. I want to make sure he gets a point now too. But just one last point that I think is really important, and you made this, Charles, at the beginning of your conversation. If we can reinforce these institutions, the failure of our largest banks to invest or place deposits or share fees and revenues, because they've always said in the past these institutions are too small, or if we can beef them up, get more tier 1 capital in, allow them some of the tools that larger institutions have, this is a structural change that will frankly get rid of their excuses of why the big five are not doing more with these institutions already.
One more thing I might say before we move on to Greg. 2 things. What you can do, Mark alluded to this. You have any contacts with Republican senators? Talk to them in the next week and tell them to go to McConnell and say, this is a good provision. We should put this in the COVID-4 bill, okay? Second, any of you now, Mnuchin, I've really spent lots of time educating him on CDFIs and MDIs. And he now understands, I think, that their need, but Trump could say, I don't want this, or Mnuchin could say, I don't want this, and that would put a real roadblock there. Robert Smith has done a good job. We've been a 1-2 public-private partnership, just tagging him. And that's how we got him finally to put the $10 billion set aside for CDFIs to lend. But going to Mnuchin or someone in the administration and getting them to also tell Mnuchin that this is a good thing and should be in will also help us. Because as Mark said, this is going to happen in the next 3-4 weeks. If we don't get it done then, well, there may be other opportunities, but this is a golden opportunity that we shouldn't pass up. So please contact, I know we have a lot of people on this call. Please contact any Republican Senate friends you have and just don't let them say, yeah, I'm for it. You got to ask them to go to McConnell and say, you tell McConnell you want this in the bill. And similarly, any administration friends you have, particularly those on the economic side of things, go to Mnuchin and say, we need this in the bill. Thanks.
Welcome, Congressman Meeks. And I want to say a few words. Thank you for making it. You're on mute.
Thank you, Charles. And hello, everybody. I apologize for being late, but as always takes place, votes happened when the meeting was called. So I'm just running back from votes that we've had on the floor. I'm delighted to be here and delighted about this bill. This is a game changer, and everyone on this call has been working diligently to make this happen. This is never, something when we talk about economics and investing in communities of color, like a district like mine, it is not heard of, where we are able to empower MDIs and CDFIs who understands the community and deals with business in communities like mine, we're becoming where banking deserts are, in fact. So I'm delighted. I know there's been a lot of work. I've focused all of my attention since I've become the chairman of the Consumer Protection and Financial Institutions Subcommittee to working to get this thing done. We're coming very close. And I think that, and I should say, just caught the last part of the conversation. I know We're working on the Republicans on the Senate side. But I got to tell you that on the House side, the Republicans, that's why I have great belief that we can get it done on the Senate side, because the Republicans that I've talked to, even on the House, will support this bill and we'll get it through. And I'm talking to some of them to reach out to some of the Republican senators to say this is the right thing to do. So I know you're taking questions now, so I'm just glad to join and apologize for being late.
Well, thanks for joining us. So I think I'll turn over to David and Tony, you guys.
Thanks, Charles. I'll go first. I know that Senator Booker may have a short timeline, so I have a question for you. Senator Schumer spoke of it. You've also spoken about the need to think longer term than just immediate relief for the current economic downturn. That resonates with me as an investor, looking beyond what might bring back quick returns to create something sustainable that creates more and more value over time, critically important. How do you see this investment evolving over the long term? What will it achieve? And what would a successful return mean from your standpoint in terms of this bill?
He's on mute.
Mute.
Cory, mute.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you. When you're giving me technology advice, the board knows where
that is not my forte, you know.
No, that's really embarrassing.
It's my phone, Cory.
My staff that's watching this will now ride me for the rest of the week that Chuck Schumer gave me technical salvation. I was saying that Kamala said a lot of this in her opening address. I mean, this is not about going back to normal. Normal is so unacceptable to me. When I was mayor of the city of Newark, trying to get capital into my city for safe investments. I still remember battling to just try to get a capital stack that worked for our first hotel in 40 years. Well, once we got Goldman and others to help us get it done, suddenly now, a short matter of years later, we're at 4 or 5 new hotels in Newark. I can't tell you that the biggest issue we faced all the time, where we had credit-worthy businesses, development projects, and more, that we just couldn't get capital to come into an African-American city. And this is a real challenge. Now, what I found, and again, this is where I thank people like Mark Warner, who's been such a valuable mentor to me, and then a lot of the folks that are on this call and part of this organization, it was an odyssey for me in discovering that a lot of the black banks that I knew, how they just needed the kind of things that our bill does, which builds capacity within those banks, flexible grants, upgrades in technology. I mean, Robert Smith took me through a very long tutorial on why so many of our minority serving institutions could not handle these loans. And therefore, a lot of the businesses in the black community were not getting access to lending institutions that could help them. So there are a lot of structural elements that Mark laid out in this bill that will really help in the long run to open up the doors of more capital for our community, strengthen these minority lending institutions. And now look, we know that this, and when Netflix announces this, and by the way, Mo Cowan, who has been texting me during this call, is right. We should be calling out every major institution to doing to dwarfing what Netflix does. I live in Newark, just 10 miles away from Wall Street. But because we know when MDIs and CDFIs are empowered in that way, they are 6.5 times more likely to give black folks loans than the ones that they receive on average. And the data is incredible when you start drilling down into it about the long-term transformative change that this can make. McKinsey did a powerful study that estimates that if black communities like the one I live in, I talked to 2 mayors in New Jersey of black cities, if they enjoyed the same level of economic activity as white communities, our entire nation would see about a $1.5 trillion boost to our GDP. And so this sideline capital, I've been working since I got to the Senate on trying to get it activated and engaged. That's why Tim Scott and I wrote the Opportunity Zone legislation. It's why I've got some other legislation I've been pushing about small businesses. But the brilliance of this bill, thank you, Greg Meeks and Mark Warner for being our leads on this. And of course, it never hurts to have the power of Chuck Schumer 100% aligned with this. But the power of this bill is it's not just a short-term problem. For what I've been dealing with from the dawn of my career, it actually has a long-term impact in expanding the possibilities for strong financial institutions that are equipped and empowered just by helping to pull a lot of the loans, buying the loans off the balance sheets of these Black lending institutions. It gives them even more capacity. All of these things are about bringing capital to where it wasn't before. Every time I hear one of my friends who invests in emerging markets, I scream in my head that the United States of America has all of these emerging markets that will provide better returns than any global emerging market right here in the United States of America in Black and brown communities that have been starved of economic investment, and their institutions have been in many ways, the institutions that loan to them have been in many ways kept at a fragile, small economic footprint, and we can make it so much bigger through this bill.
For the entire team, good evening, and thank you for joining the call, and hats off for this terrific opportunity to just take advantage of the opportunity that we're presented with. Not only the opportunity, I think as Senator Harris very nicely said, about the crises that we're finding on three fronts: the health crises, the economic crises, and the conversation around race nationally, but also the opportunity that we've been tracking for quite a while, which is that entrepreneurship in the Black community is up 34%, while all other ethnic groups are down. So this opportunity really is meeting the moment of challenge and crisis, but also the moment of opportunity to accelerate a trend that prior to COVID really was emerging as something that was quite promising. But if we take a step back, I'm curious just to open the aperture on the conversation just a little bit. And if we believe that this is a very important leg of the stool to address the economic injustice that has been in our history federally legislated and reinforced, what do you think are the next 2 or 3 things that should be the work of Congress to build on this very good initiative? Because the work clearly isn't done once we've achieved this, and let's hope that it all passes. But what would the next 2 or 3 things be to continue to build out a Black economic infrastructure and to try to continue the dismantling of some of the structural things that are standing in the way of economic progress for Black Americans? I think you're on mute.
You're on mute, Senator.
Maybe I can make my.
Got it.
I'm sorry, Kamala. I will always yield to Kamala Harris. Go ahead.
Go, Cory. I think you have to leave, so go.
I do. I was gonna make my sort of some final comments about when you talk about sort of what what we can enjoy in terms of changing this, and this is something that we've been talking about for a long time. With my colleagues in the Senate, I've had ad nauseum conversations with Mark Warner, Kamala, and others about how do you, and many of the people of the Black Economic Alliance, about how do we really make a commitment in this country to creating Black wealth, which now is such a small fraction of the average white family. And so some of this has to be the economic safety net, common sense stuff that I've heard people from the right talk about for years, but we just never have done. Paul Ryan used to talk about the earned income tax credit. Well, I've seen Kamala's proposals. I've had some other senators to massively expand the earned income tax credit, massively expand the child tax credit. So much of our tax code and these tax expenditures is used to help people with wealth create more wealth. What we need to be doing is thinking about the tax code as a way to make sure that work pays in this country and people can start building wealth on their own, doing a lot of those other things. The second thing I would say is a bill that I have that I think we've got to start talking about, especially in a capitalist society, is that every child born in America should be born with an interest-bearing account. And when we have a bill around baby bonds, that Columbia University looked at it, because if every year a kid gets a deposit into that bank account up to $2,000, depending upon the wealth of their family, it actually, by the time a kid's 18, the lowest income kids, whether they come from Appalachia or Newark, is going to, if you're a low income kid, you're going to have upwards of $50,000 to invest in starting a business, getting an education, buying a home, things that trigger the economy. Columbia University says something like that would virtually eliminate the racial wealth gap for the next generation, for young kids growing up. We need to start thinking of big ideas about how to level the economic playing field. That's why this bill is so important, that really focuses on Black wealth development and the kind of things that build wealth in communities that have been so dramatically denied. There's a lot of good ideas. And that's one thing I want to end on, because the question is, how do we get this bill passed? And both Senator Schumer and Senator Warner said this is why politics does matter. And this organization, Black Economic Alliance, which I still remember Kamala and I being out in the Hamptons back in 2018, I think, Kamala, where it was one of the you and I watched the dawn and the birth of this organization with its noble goals and aspirations. But I do not want to be having this conversation 10 years from now. I think we can deal with this problem. And I think there's a growing consciousness to analyze these problems. And again, I salute Chuck Schumer for even getting on the reparations bill that Greg Meeks and others worked on coming out of the House, because more and more people are growing up and seeing the conscious that we have a country built that up until the 70s, overt laws to prevent African Americans from building wealth. I remember being out in the Midwest looking at farmers who had their original land grants from the 1800s, immigrant families who were new to this country. But that land grant problem that 20% of Americans can trace their history back to land grants like that, Blacks were excluded from completely. And so I believe that if we exercise political strength right now and appeal to folks, as was said by Mark Warner, people who believe in wealth, believe in free market systems, but might be understand how consciously this has not been a free market. This has been the exclusion of African Americans to opportunity. And so having that kind of political agenda, as well as a legislative agenda, that's going to be the power that in the next 10 years could prevent us from having to have this conversation. But it starts right now with yet another conversation about $1 trillion plus coming out of the United States Senate and House. We've already seen how these efforts before have not been as level of a playing field as they could have been. And this is where I thank the Black Economic Alliance and others who've been trying to work for correct this. But the urgency is now, and should the political world shift with a Senate, with Chuck Schumer as a majority leader and a presidency controlled by Joe Biden, we've seen Black electoral power, how important it was in the primaries, for example. This is the time that we need to clearly have an agenda and begin to drive it to deal with a lot of these issues. So I'm excited about the possibilities right now in this COVID bill, as Chuck has urged you all to reach out to Republican senators that you might know. But we've got to have an agenda for January, God willing, that we can start to take on the issues from Black economic security, Black education, which is critical to Black economic empowerment, a focus on small businesses, all the way up to the shameful realities that government is making millionaires, creating millions of dollars of wealth every single day, that we still don't have things as obvious as the biggest pension funds on the planet Earth, arguably right here in the United States of America, federal pension funds, and there's no real emerging manager program to make sure Blacks, Latinos, and women have a share of that. We already see a run on a lot of the programs that were for minority businesses in the federal government. The COVID has been an excuse for the Trump administration to blunt and block those programs from effectively creating equal opportunity. So the clarity of an agenda, the ideas have been out there for a long time, but we need to combine our legislative agenda with political power. And that's what's exciting, I think, to Kamala and I both when we watch the birth of this organization. And we hope that it yields not only great success now and on great legislation like this, but also in the next 4 to 5 years that we could actually begin to end the savage inequalities that exist in wealth between Black and white in this country that have been such since its founding.
Senator Booker, appreciate those thoughts, and thanks for being such an early supporter of BEA as well.
Thank you.
And Senator Harris, I know you have to go as well. You were early supporting also, so please.
Of course, and Cory said a lot, of all of which I, of course, agree with. I guess to add to that, I would like to emphasize the importance of the agenda as we go forward on the issue of housing and home ownership. As we know, again, the intersection between the laws that have prevented access to capital, the systemic racism, which has contributed to the wealth gap, 1/10 of the wealth of white families, black families own, redlining. And what we know, again, I keep using this term intergenerational wealth because that is one of the things we don't have and we need. It's a simple point, right? If it's when the family owns the home that they can say to their son when he wants to go to Howard University, oh, yes, that was a shameful plug. When he wants to go to Howard University, they can say, son, you don't have to take out a loan with these high interest rates. I'll take some of the equity out of my home. Or if the daughter goes to the father and says, Daddy, I want to start a small business, he can say, honey, I'll give you some of the equity out of the home. You don't have to go in. Intergenerational wealth. And we still have a huge challenge when it comes to home ownership in America for African-American families. And again, back to the point of MDIs, which are 4 times more likely to loan the money for a mortgage for Black home ownership. I have also had an initiative that has been about what we need to do to put a federal investment in families that are living in federally subsidized housing or in historically redlined communities to help them with down payments to buy a home. So I'd like us to take a look at that. I think it's very significant, again, to put families on the path towards economic freedom and health. Another point is I have a bill that's called the LIFT Act, which for families that make less than $100,000, to the point of what Cory was talking about, tax credits, give them a tax credit of up to $500 a month. Before the pandemic struck, we knew that almost half of American families could not afford a $400 unexpected expense, and that's only gotten worse, obviously, since the pandemic. Our LIFT Act would benefit 60% of Black households. And so let's look at tax credits, let's look at home ownership and incentives for home ownership, in addition to what we do to fortify the MDIs, which are a predominant source of lending to Black families to be able to buy a home. And again, I want to thank the BAA for all you are doing. It's a group of incredible leaders as individuals, but you have come together to influence and to help lead public policy in America. And I know each of you, and I know you do this at great sacrifice in terms of your other responsibilities, but you're making our jobs easier because of your innovation, your ideas, your experience, and your vision. So thank you for that, and I'm glad to be a part of tonight, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Tony, let me just say a couple things because I got to run, but I want to follow up on what Kamala and Cory said. First, our Economic Justice Act has a lot of the ideas that Kamala, Cory, and others have mentioned because they're incorporated. It's $250 billion. What I ask is, and we're going to try to get it in this bill, but we may only get a piece of it, particularly your act in this bill. I would ask that you send it. I'll send it to Chuck and to Tony. Can you send it to all your members so they see it? And let me give you some of the thoughts in there that weren't mentioned. One of the things that holds minority kids back is they don't have access to internet. They don't have Wi-Fi. They don't have, my wife is the COO of the New York Public Library. When the libraries in New York City, in the poorer neighborhoods, close at 6 p.m., even in the dead of winter, the kids, and the kids are almost 95% kids of color. They're immigrants, they're Black, they're Hispanic. They sit along the walls of the library and on the steps to get the bleed from the internet. They're so desperate to have it. And she took me twice to go look. They're not playing video games. They're teaching and learning. Well, we should require, Franklin Roosevelt said every home in America should have electricity in the 30s. We should say every home in America should have broadband. And to build that broadband and pay for that broadband in many areas, we should have a minority set aside. So the businesses have to be minority that help build this. If we have $1 trillion infrastructure bill that we would put on the floor in January, we require 25% of the money of that $1 trillion goes to minority and women-owned women-led businesses. That will help in combination of what we're doing here. When you create the demand, it makes a huge difference. And there's no reason, except for lack of capital and racial barriers, racism, that minority entrepreneurs can't create construction businesses. It's been a history old thing. And if you have $1 trillion out there and a quarter of the money goes to minorities, that's going to really draw people in. And then when you have what we're doing here today, it's a huge thing. So we have a whole big program that answers a lot of what you said, Tony. And I will send to you, to Chuck, and to, if you can send it out to your membership. It's something that all of our civil rights groups have gotten behind, including the groups on the phone here, Urban League and NAACP, NAN, and all of the folks there. This is a bridge to the future, and we're not going to stop just with COVID, as I mentioned. We're going to look at COVID for permanent changes, but then we're going to look for more permanent changes. This is a moment. Hopefully, it won't go away. Our younger generation is far more conscious of the racial bigotry, discrimination that has occurred in this country than the older generation. It's our duty to capitalize on that and get things done. So I'll send you that, but we have a lot of good ideas.
Tony, could I just very quickly add?
I'm going to have to say goodbye.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. Just to answer your charge for us, we will certainly do that. You know, we represent a broad coalition of Black business leaders and other stakeholders, and we'd be delighted to work with you on that. And opening the aperture is exactly what we want to do.
Before I go, the person who was the greatest engine for all of this, what we're talking about, is this man right here, Mark Warner. He was relentless, relentless. He would call everyone up. He was obsessed with this, and he deserves our thanks and credit. So
that is political talk for being a pain in the ass. But let me just add two things. And Chuck, you know, I endorse everything Kamala said and Cory said. And on the internet, you know, I'm very proud to partner with Jim Clyburn on a $100 billion investment that would finish this job on high-speed internet connectivity. And you obviously have one of your members, David Grain, is one of the top 5 national leaders on this subject. He has built a business that's remarkable in this space. Let me just add one other idea very quickly. Tony, you said, what would be one of the other big substantial changes? And my colleagues have had to hear, and David and others have had to hear, you know, 40 years ago, and I partially got wealthy out of this, we changed the tax code and the accounting system to give a tax break and created a whole new asset class around research and development. So if you buy a robot right now that might replace people for $5,000, you get an R&D tax credit. The robot's an asset. You can put it on your balance sheet. If that same company invested in 2 human beings and made them more efficient than the robot, they would not get the same tax break or asset designation or ability to brag about it. I think you want a radical idea that actually, I think, whose time has come. Let's treat investment in human beings and skew it towards low and moderate income human beings to make investment in upskilling those individuals a tax credit worthy item. Let's create an asset class about investment in human capital, and the SEC is working on this. And then let's reward and recognize public companies who upscale their people, again, with a bias towards low and moderate income people. That will benefit all Americans, but unfortunately, because of systemic racism, it will disproportionately benefit Black and brown Americans. And I think that is an idea whose time has come.
So let me just add in, and I want to thank Senator Warner also for his being relentless and working collectively together to get this done. Because this is really unprecedented, and it's a game changer in that, you know, one of my frustrations have been in Congress when it comes to talk about Black folk, and we always talk about the wealth gap. Well, I'm for $15 an hour jobs, but we will never close the wealth gap with $15 an hour jobs. And I get frustrated because it seems as though when they're talking about $15 an hour, that's when they talk about Black economics. That should be the only jobs that Black folk can get is a $15 an hour job. That's crazy to me. And we've never talked, you know, you think about the history of Congress and where it puts its money. It's never been putting its money into business where people could sustain themselves because of access to capital. And then at the same time, it's those banks that run from our communities and leave nothing there. And that's why, you know, you talk about historically, who's really made the money and tried to get, it's the loan sharks, because our folks could not get any money from any place else. And this is for the first time when we're talking about putting true capital into financial institutions that can underwrite and create the businesses that will then make it happen. You know, I think about banks now. We talk about, and we get these spurts at times where we say, oh, all Black folks are to put their money into an MDI or a CDFI. For that money, those banks can't exist just upon those deposits. Because right now, those individuals that are making those deposits, as soon as their bills come, that money's coming out because many of them are still working paycheck to paycheck. And therefore, there's no additional capital that's in the banks to lend the money to someone that has an innovative idea to create a business that will sustain itself, create jobs, and create ownership in the community so that it can create wealth that really will close a wealth gap. This bill is designed that we can really make significant progress in closing the wealth gap. We never talk about investing in Black people like this before. We've always talked about investing in social programs. And I got nothing against social programs, but this is different. This is not investing in the social. This is investing in the economic, and this is why it has to be done now because of the political language. I was talking to a young Black lawyer who was talking about being against banks and financial institutions because he didn't see and understand what their relevance is because they've left the community a long time ago. When he should be talking about, I want to make sure I have access to that capital because I have this wisdom and I don't have capital, I need to get it. This gets us there. That's why this is a game changer that will pay off time and time again. So again, Senator Warner, it's been great partnering with you on this because this is out of the box thinking. This is not the standard political conversation that goes on. This is what will make a tremendous difference in the future. And as Senator Booker said, I don't want to be talking about this 10 years from now. I want to be talking about how successful we were and look at all the businesses because we've leveled the playing field in that regard. Because anytime we level the playing field, our folks and their genius have succeeded and we've been equal with everybody. And that's how we get equal economically and close that wealth gap.
Senator Warner and Representative Meeks, thanks for all the hard work on this. And it is going to be a game changer. We're going to do everything we can to influence as many people as we can and working with our partners at the Urban League and NAACP as well. So let me turn it over to Tony to close it out.
Well, a lot has been already said. We appreciate both the generosity of your time this evening and your partnership, and certainly for you, Senator Warner, for your leadership, your vision in this particular area, your collegial approach to this with Representative Meeks and our colleagues in the House and the other leaders, and importantly, your great friendship with David Grain, because we know that has really made a significant difference in truly understanding this issue and in striking the advocacy, which is so essential. We have access, as I mentioned to Leader Schumer before he left, to a broad array of individuals who are concerned about this topic, Black business leaders, white business leaders, people who are just interested in correcting the economic infrastructure insufficiencies that exist. And we'd love to continue to build on our work together to move beyond this particular opportunity, which is historic in itself, and to find that next set of opportunities which this team has so eloquently articulated, because our work is not done. This will be a great initiative. It will scratch the surface, and we have so much more to do, and you have our commitment and partnership to our colleagues on the Senate side, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side, our colleagues in the House, Congressman Meeks, to do everything within our power to draw attention to these issues, to continue the good fight, because we have a lot of tearing down of old walls and infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt. So we want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. For more about the organization, please visit us at blackeconomicalliance.org. Become a part of this army to support this great work and advance the opportunity for Black Americans all over this country, because we are living in an historic moment. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to my co-chair, Charles Phillips, for his enduring partnership with me, to David Clooney, without whose leadership we would not be able to do this, and to our colleagues in the social justice and civil rights organizations who have actually made it possible for us all to be here. Good evening, and thank you.